Hello and welcome. My name is SatC, and today we will be breaking down the fifth episode of season one of Sex and the City. The Power of Female Sex was directed by the returning Susan Seidelman. Its story was by Genji Cohen, with its teleplay being by Darren Star. Now, I'm not a screenwriter, but from what I gather, this means that the general outline of the episode, including the plot and characters, was provided by Cohen, while Star did the script, including dialogue and production details. So basically, Cohen provided the foundation and Star filled in all of those little details. Genji Cohen has done so much for TV as a writer and producer. She was the creator and showrunner of Orange is the New Black and one of my favorite shows, Weeds. She also produced and wrote for a bunch of shows like Mad About You and Gilmore Girls. We opened the episode with some traditional voiceover from Carrie. She tells us that the most powerful woman in New York is not Tina Brown, Diane Sawyer, or even Rosie O'Donnell. It's the hostess at Balzac. Now, if you're younger than me, you may not know who these women are, or you may only be familiar with one or two. So let's talk about them quickly before returning to the story. Tina Brown is an English-born journalist, editor, columnist, broadcaster, and author. In 1998, when the show aired, she was editor-in-chief of The New Yorker and had previously served as editor-in-chief for Tatler and Vanity Fair. Now, around the time of this episode airing in July 1998, she left The New Yorker and has had a lot of ups and downs in her career since then, but she was appointed a Commander of the Order of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth II in 2000. Diane Sawyer is a legendary broadcast journalist who, in 1998, was a major figure for ABC News, co-anchoring Primetime Live and 2020. And ABC headquarters is located in Lincoln Square in Manhattan. Rosie O'Donnell is a comedian, producer, author, and television personality. In 1998, she was hosting the very successful Rosie O'Donnell Show, which was filmed in her native New York, specifically in NBC studios at 30 Rockefeller Center, or 30 Rock. Now, before we move on, I do want to speculate on this specific list of powerful women in New York, because there really could have been any number of women included on this list. They could have easily chosen Anna Wintour, Barbara Walters, Katie Couric, Joan Rivers, Ivanka, Kathy Lee Gifford, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, or really any number of socialites who constantly appeared on page 6. But I think Brown, Sawyer, and O'Donnell were chosen because they were well known enough to trigger an understanding outside of New York, particularly Sawyer and O'Donnell, who were on television. And all of them were New York enough that New Yorkers wouldn't feel like this is a list put together by Californians pretending like they know who's powerful in New York. More importantly, though, I think this was a safe list. Star and HBO wouldn't necessarily have to worry about possible retaliation from these three, whereas others I listed may be offended and then hold it against the show or HBO in the future. Now, I'm not saying these particular women weren't powerful in their own right, or that the ones I listed were like irrationally vindictive. I'm just saying there's always going to be entertainment industry politics involved whenever you name drop someone, especially if you're filming in New York. So moving on, we learned that Balzac had become an overnight sensation, or as Carrie puts it, the only restaurant that mattered. Which I guess makes sense since John's restaurant became borderline tired on its opening night. And let's talk about Balzac for a minute. Balzac doesn't exist, nor did it ever exist. What I'm pretty sure happened is the restaurant they wanted to use didn't let them use it. So Balthazar is likely that restaurant. It opened in 1997, so it was incredibly trendy, and reservations are still recommended there 27 years later. However, Balthazar is in Soho, and the vibe is totally different. Balthazar is a romantic brasserie that serves traditional French fare. But like I said, I'm sure production did want to shoot at and therefore use the name Balthazar, and they weren't able to do so, so they went with the location they were able to shoot in. But Balthazar is still open, so check them out if you're in New York. So instead, filming took place at Metronome, which used to exist at 915 Broadway in the Flatiron District. Metronome was apparently a jazz lounge, which would explain this Art Deco interior. Through the years, it was also Strata, and is now a Charles Schwab. Our hostess is played by Mimi Langland, who wouldn't be in very much after this. But we find Carrie and Samantha at the bar, where I can finally, for certain, say that they are drinking Cosmopolitans. So cheers to our first official appearance of the iconic drink. Now, they are very brave to be drinking Cosmos on empty stomachs at lunchtime, especially since this is likely not their first round. Apparently, they've been waiting for 45 minutes, which prompts Samantha to have the beginning of a very Karen moment. Luckily, she just goes up and tries to convince the hostess that they should be seated, but they don't get a seat, so they leave, this time after appropriately finishing their drinks. Now, I'm going to put a pin on two things Samantha says here. First, I wielded my power in a benevolent manner. And second, if she were a man, not only would we be eating right now, but they'd be sending over free drinks. So after lunch, Carrie goes to Dolce & Gabbana to do some shoe shopping. And this location is likely the former Soho location that we'll see again in season 2. And it used to be at 434 West Broadway. This could also be a totally different location though, because luxury retail is a fickle bitch. But we're likely in Soho because it would have been near Balthazar. Anyway, we open up to Carrie and we get a fuller view of her outfit, which includes these Prada animal print sandals, this Nanette Lepore dress, and the red vintage alligator clutch she carried everywhere in the last episode. Also, like the previous episode, I think she's going to wear this trench coat in a few more scenes. Now, she goes to buy these silver puff sandals that would totally be so hot right now, as long as they're faux fur. Unfortunately, her card is declined and destroyed, which is our first indication that Carrie just is not the best at managing her money. But this will be more relevant later on in the series, so let's move on. Luckily for Carrie, and the plot, Amalita Amalfi hands them an American Express Platinum card to pay for the shoes instead. She tells us that Carlo will pay for the shoes, and we see him carrying a bunch of bags, which include one from Gucci. They've been together for about 2 months. He's apparently Argentinian, and she could have given Samantha some advice later on this season. One thing that's fascinating to me, though, she's like, oh, it's on Carlo. But we can kind of make out that the name on the card is Amalita Amalfi. So she probably just has Carlo paying for the credit card statement, which won't be totally relevant to what I'm going to say about Amalita, but it's an interesting thing to note. Now, Amalita and Carrie acknowledge that they haven't seen each other in ages, but Carrie says that they'd really only met a few times before, despite the fact that Amalita calls her like a sister. She describes Amalita as such. Most people would classify Amalita as Eurotrash. I thought she was fun. So let's talk about Amalita Amalfi for a moment. She's another character from the book. We meet her in Chapter 7, International Crazy Girls. She's described a few different ways throughout the chapter and the book, so I'll synthesize what is said about her. If you're lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it, you might one day run into a certain type of woman in New York. Like a constantly migrating, brightly colored bird, she's always on the go. though, and not in the mundane Filofax-filled way. This woman travels from one international hotspot to another. And when she's tired of the party season in London, when she's had enough of skiing in Aspen or Gstaad, when she's sick of all-night parties in South America, she might come back to roost temporarily, mind you, in New York. A woman we'll call Amalita Amalfi had a breathless, slightly accented voice that hints at Swiss finishing school and palace balls. Amalita's so beautiful, and really funny and very bold. I mean, she's incredible. You'll run into one of these girls in Paris. Their sexual power is like this amazing, dazzling force that can change your life. But in the end, she was a lady through and through, having been raised on Fifth Avenue with a coming out party, the whole works. Now, I'm going to leave this here for now because we're going to talk about Amalita a lot later. But I do want to point out two things, starting with the actor who plays her. So Amalita is played by Carol Davis, an English-born actor who's known for her roles as Roxy in Mannequin, which starred Kim Cattrall, and as Victoria in Hacks. The second thing is her dress, which is apparently Emmanuel Ungaro, and shout out to Avi at carrie.bradshaw.style for finding similar Ungaro pieces using this fabric. I'm going to link Avi's account and my other go-to for identifying the many outfits throughout the show, Finding Carrie's Closet, in the episode bio and just all of the episode bios moving forward. It's hard enough putting these breakdowns together without having to hunt down the outfits, especially this season, since they weren't talked about as much as later season fashions. So Carrie leaves with her shoes, which brings us to our second pair of shoes Carrie has acquired in as many episodes. We catch back up with Carrie writing in her bed after getting home. She writes, I envied Amalita. Her life was a blur of rich men, designer clothes, and glamorous resorts. She didn't actually work for a living, yet possessed a dazzling sexual power that she exploited to her full advantage, which presented a certain conundrum. Where is the line between professional girlfriend and just plain professional? And again, let's put a pin in this for now. So this brings us to poker night with the girls, since Carrie can't afford to live her life, which, same, girl, okay, let's face it. Most of the apartment details remain the same from the last time these four were sitting around Carrie's table. The only major differences we see are the matching chairs Carrie and Charlotte sit in, which, as we know, was not common among quirky New York characters. We usually see whoever's in this area sitting on the chaise lounge that looks like it's pushed into the bedroom. So honestly, it's not surprising that the chairs are getting switched out from episode to episode, since Carrie doesn't have any heavy furniture like a couch that would tie her to a single layout. The desk, curtains, and lamp are all the same, as are the filing cabinet behind Samantha and the credenza behind Charlotte and Miranda. It also looks like Miranda is in the exact same chair in the exact same spot as she was in episode 2. The framed photographs on the credenza are all the same, just arranged slightly differently. Like maybe Charlotte got her hands on them and organized them to be more aesthetically pleasing. We also did see that cabinet and lamp in episode 3. And when Miranda leaves with Skippy, we see some books that are a lot easier to identify this time, but some of them have been slightly rearranged from the last time we got a really clear view of them in episode 3. And I have two things to say about the books Carrie has really scattered throughout her apartment. First, she, like me, just has a shit ton of books that don't always make it to a shelf, which is very typical of a writer, or at least a good one. And two, she might just be a hoarder with no clear direction for this collection, unlike Charlotte. The books I identified here and later on in her kitchen on the shelf are Long Live the King, a biography of Clark Gable by Lynn Tornabene, Dark Horse and The Bottom Line by Fletcher Nabel, what looks like The Abuse of Power, The Nixon Tapes by Stanley Cutler, Love's Blood by Clark Howard, High Crimes by Joseph Finder, Philly Steaks by Gillian Roberts, Till We Meet Again by Judith Krantz, Oceanfront by Douglas Wallop, Vineland by Thomas Pynchon, and Not as a Stranger by Morton Thompson. Also, when we see the wall behind Charlotte, we see that that stupid clown thing is still there, but we also get a better view of the table it's sitting on. Now, I'm pretty sure Carrie technically has a kitchen table they could have sat at a few times now. I have one of these tables that I inherited from my aunt, and mine is truly vintage. But these used to be all the rage for apartment dwellers, and they're called drop leaf dining tables. Now, they're still around, but the technology has changed a bit from the style that Carrie and I have. But I like the idea that she also inherited hers from a relative and just never thinks to pull it out and unfold it for casual company. Also, I was wrong. That orange bench is still there, but it's been shoved against the bookcase so that we can barely see it. Also, real quick before I bring up the dialogue here, Carrie is drinking a Corona, Sam is drinking a Dos Equis, and Charlotte's drinking a Miller Lite, and Miranda is drinking a Guinness Foreign Extra Stout, which is why she's the only one drinking out of a glass and not from a bottle. If you are a proper Guinness drinker, you know that you only drink it from a glass. Now, much like the episode Quandary, we're going to put a pin in the majority of this dialogue so that we can properly discuss it in a bit more context later on. But I do want to talk about Charlotte's subplot in this episode. So during this conversation, Charlotte asks, what if you sense that someone is giving you a professional advantage because they find you charming? She explains that the notoriously reclusive painter, Neville Morgan, came to her gallery during his yearly pilgrimage to Manhattan to check out what was new and hot on the art scene. Now, a couple of things here. Even though this is a very blurry and confusing flashback, this is our first good look at Charlotte's gallery, which is the Louis K. Meisel Gallery, which is located at 141 Prince Street in Soho, which is just down the street from Madame X from the last episode. Also, when Neville walks into the gallery, the camera lingers for a moment on a painting by Charles Bell, Gumball number 7, and when we pan to Charlotte, we see her holding the catalog for the 25th anniversary exhibition, which was celebrating major works by the photorealists, which include Charles Bell, Chuck Close, and other names I can't quite make out on the actual catalog, but very likely included Aubrey Flack, Roberto Bernardi, and Ron Kleeman. I'm going to talk about this more later, but this exhibition ran from April 4th to May 16th, 1998. Also, this explains why Neville wasn't interested in any art and focused on Charlotte instead. There's not actually anything new for him to see here. I'm also pretty sure that is Louis K. Meisel making a quick cameo behind Charlotte. Now, Neville is played by Charles Keating, a British actor who's known for his roles as Carl Hutchins in Another World, as Friedrich Golkin in the Thomas Crown Affair, and as Klingman in The Bodyguard. Now, he unfortunately died in 2014, but Neville invites Charlotte to his farm upstate to view his latest work. Charlotte says, so if I could get him to show at the gallery, it would be an incredible coup. But what if he wants me to, to which Carrie replies in true smartass form.
Hold his brush?
Miranda responds to this with, if he so much as suggests what she's suggesting, give me a call and we'll sue the hell out of him. That's the only proper way to trade sex for power. And Samantha is aghast, replying, I can't believe what I'm hearing. You like the Harvard Law Lorena Bobbitt. Now, I'm sure the children don't know, but those of us who are of a certain age might recall that in 1993, Lorena Bobbitt famously cut off her husband's penis after he allegedly SA'd her and threw it out of her car window. I have always been a Lorena Bobbitt fan, but again, put a pin in all of this because I want to try to contextualize all of these dialogue points later in the episode. But Skipper comes to pick up Miranda, who is still abusing that doll, and we move to later as Carrie lies in bed reading. So Carrie is reading Night Train by Martin Amis, which is a comedic parody of American detective novels. Now, if I really wanted to fuck up my life, I would dissect the reason Carrie is reading this particular book, but I won't. What I'll say is this book came out in 1997, and Amos was named one of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945 by Time magazine, so it makes sense that she's reading his newest novel. She's also wearing these ridiculously fun Nick and Nora counting sheep pajamas that also showed up on Buffy in season 3 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and on Jen in season 6 of Dawson's Creek. Now, as Carrie is reading and not spending money, Amalita calls her to tell her to come to Balzac so she can meet someone. Carrie decides to go so that she can wear her new Dolces, which she pairs with a metallic slip dress by Marc Jacobs and what again looks like that same trench coat from earlier. Unlike earlier, she's carrying this adorable black polka dot clutch, which could be a Jimmy Choo. And shout out to shopyourtv.com for this one. But one thing I find so odd that I don't think we'll ever see again is this transition between scenes, which has this high heel cutout. It's very a la 1970s Wonder Woman or 1960s Batman. Carrie meets Amalita at the hostess's table, and I don't know for sure what Amalita is wearing, but if I had to guess, it would also be an Ungaro. Ungaro was famous for his silk jacquard dresses, especially ones with a matching coat, which this one has. But Amalita shows off her new Van Cleef& Arpels bracelet, which she says cost $12,000. And I'm going to be a snob for a second because this will be important later, but it is considered gauche to discuss the cost of a piece of jewelry in a social situation, especially if it's a gift, and honestly, especially if it's a Van Cleef& Arpels bracelet. Like, we know that shit's expensive, Amalita. Really, though, some of the things Amalita says here, combined with this cigarette holder, are definitely giving us a nod to Breakfast at Tiffany's, which really established this kind of archetype. Although I will say Amalita is much more mag than Holly Golightly, but I'll get into all of that toward the end of the episode. So we meet Gilles, an architect from Paris who's just in New York for a couple of days. Gilles is played by Ed Fry, a Chicago-born actor who is really only known for his role as Larry McDermott on As the World Turns outside of this role. So to quickly summarize, we have an English-born actor playing an Italian and a Chicago-born actor playing a French architect, with the only accent that really makes sense being the English Charles Keating playing a British painter. Now, Carrie is her clever self as she flirts with Gilles, and then the waiter comes up and... Okay. Apparently, at this restaurant, the day shift wears pink button-ups, while the night shift wear these horrible gold lame shirts.
That I can't even talk about.
Anyway, we catch up with Carrie and Gilles as they cross the street in front of the Met, which has the banners for its current shows. Those shows are Ellsworth Kelly on the Roof, which opened on May 1st, 1998, and was there to coincide with his 75th birthday. The exhibition on Pierre-Paul Prud'hon, which was also there in May. And we also see the banner for the exhibition Honoré Lanoir, Parisian cabinet maker in Federal, New York, which opened in April and closed in June 1998. So I'm guessing they filmed this scene in May, which I'll talk about here in a moment. I'm also guessing they're crossing the street because a cab dropped them off in front of the Met. Like, there's no way they walked all the way from 915 Broadway, especially in Carrie's new shoes. Now, as they cross, Carrie tells us, I discovered that Gilles was recently divorced with a 5-year-old daughter, Beatrice, who lived with her mother in Paris. And does this story sound vaguely familiar? No spoilers, but it should. Gilles also tries to get Carrie to move to Paris with him after work in Brazil is done. She says this sounds enticing so that she can save money on rent. She says that writing does pay well, but that...
I have this little substance abuse problem. Expensive footwear.
I do have a feeling that this particular character trait, while very common for a kind of someone like Carrie, is an homage to Candace Bushnell. Bushnell mentions designer footwear a few times throughout the book, and she has been called a fashionista in her own right outside of her Sex and the City notoriety. They make a date to see each other the next day, and as Carrie walks away, she says, "Sure, I saw some red flags, divorced, French, and almost uncomfortably handsome, but I felt like I was floating on air." So let's talk about these red flags for a second. So, spoiler alert, Big is divorced. He's not French, but at least Carrie thinks he's almost uncomfortably handsome. But in one of the oddest parallels that I would not have noticed if it weren't for rewatching this episode and the previous one so many times, Gilles is standing in almost the exact spot we last saw Big, right outside of the Stanhope and under the awning. Only last time, Carrie was walking toward 81st, and this time she's walking in the opposite direction toward 80th Street. But she glimpses back to both of them, and Gilles and Big look almost exactly the same as they look toward her. Big moves his head down, while Gilles moves his head upright. Also, Carrie walks away during the day last time, and we're at night here. Also, side note, this made me notice that everyone in the final scene of the 4th episode was dressed for pretty chilly weather while we're in the late spring or early summer here. So I have a feeling they actually taped this episode, or at least this scene, much later than the previous episode. Either way, this moment where Carrie floats up is so weird to me. It reminds me of the batshit crazy when you really think about it ending of Grease, when Danny and Sandy die and float up to heaven. Like, I know that's a really dark interpretation of the car just randomly flying away, but it was out of place then, and it's out of place here. But as I mentioned in the 3rd episode breakdown, we're still seeing a lot of experimentation in the show. We then cut very dramatically to the shoes hitting the floor as Carrie says, "The next morning I was brought back down to earth as I confronted that eternal puzzle, a closet full of clothes, nothing to wear." We see that the closet is getting slightly better, but for some reason in the past few hours, Carrie has totally rearranged the shelf next to her bed and removed the bench that's been at the foot of her bed. I also can't get over this nightie she's wearing. Like, I know I've already been such a snob about some season 1 choices, but did we somehow find ourselves in the suburbs? Now, Skipper shows up for some reason and complains about his situation with Miranda. Carrie puts on this DKNY skirt as he's talking, and I do like the detail that we see the dress Carrie's going to wear on the bed next to Skipper when he sits down. But why is Carrie getting dressed in this skirt and top if the dress is right there? Honestly, Carrie's hair looks longer than in the rest of the episode, and with this furniture rearrangement, I feel like this scene was filmed later and then shoehorned in so that we get some kind of progress on Miranda and Skipper's relationship. Like, we're not going to see Skippy again until episode 7. Also, those shoes that are hitting the floor at the beginning of this scene, those aren't the Dolces. They're lilac feather shoes by Jimmy Choo. I love Carrie's reaction to what Skipper says, but I do think that they forgot to end this relationship between Skipper and Miranda, so they threw this scene and subsequent narration in there. Now, moving on to the date with Gilles, we hear French accordion music playing as we transition to this lush view of Central Park just off 5th Avenue. On the left, we can see the GM building in the background, as well as the top of the Pierre Hotel and the Sherry Netherland. And we also see the Solo building on the right. Carrie and Gilles walk through Central Park with the cherry blossoms surrounding them before they make it to the Alice in Wonderland statue, which is also on the east side of the park. This iconic bronze statue was constructed in 1959 by José de Kreeft. The sculpture is unique because people, mostly children, are encouraged to touch and interact with the statue. We'll also see the statue in Dash and Lily, and I feel like we see it at least once in Gossip Girl and very likely in Elf, possibly in Home Alone 2. Carrie's wearing a Rafat Ozbek dress with a boa as a scarf, which is so painfully 90s. She tells us she feels like she's landed in a Claude Lelouch film, a man and a slightly neurotic woman. Now, Claude Lelouch is a French director who's best known to US American audiences for his 1966 romantic melodrama, A Man and a Woman. They end up in an actual Stanhope hotel room, and I wasn't sure of this at first, but we see Stanhope on the envelope Gilles left the note in and on the robe Carrie wears during breakfast. And this brings us to a bit later in the morning after Miranda and Samantha have shown up. We get to hear what Gilles wrote from Miranda. Thanks for the beautiful day. But just like with the cab scene in the previous episode, how long were they sitting there before Carrie revealed the note and the cash? They already have their breakfast. And we do see behind Carrie that it's apparently been 3 hours since Gilles left. I'm guessing she called Miranda and Sam immediately, told them to get to the hotel in a couple of hours, and then she took a nap. Or at least I'm hoping she took a nap, because 7 a.m. is very early for a writer. Samantha reminds us that she couldn't get into Balzac, which is relevant later, but I do love that that's what she's shocked by, not the $1,000 on the nightstand. And I'm just going to touch on the more explosive parts of this conversation, but Miranda and Samantha discuss said money. Samantha says, money is power, sex is power, therefore getting money for sex is simply an exchange of power. Miranda responds, don't listen to the dime store Camille Paglia. Now, who is that? Camille Paglia is a feminist, though not in the strictest sense of the word. She functions within feminist academia, but more as a social critic. And she's been described as an anti-feminist feminist. In terms of Miranda's response here, Paglia is very libertarian in her views on prostitution and has written, the prostitute is not, as feminists claim, the victim of men, but rather their conqueror, an outlaw who controls the sexual channels between nature and culture. But Miranda asks, who is this Amalita Amalfi character anyway? I'm concerned that you've been drafted into a ring of high-class hookers. Carrie responds with, she isn't a hooker. She's like an international party girl. And Miranda says she's a hooker with a passport. After some back and forth about why Gilles left the money, Samantha says, sweetheart, men give, women receive. It's biological destiny. And Miranda responds, hello, do you really want to be saying that? I mean, that's exactly the kind of argument men have been using since the dawn of time to exploit women. Again, I'm not going to comment on the substance of this exchange. I'm going to save that for the season 1 retrospective, but I do find it fascinating that Miranda and Samantha typically agree with each other about these kind of things and will generally find themselves on the same side of the discussion, but apparently only when Charlotte is there. So if we remember from the pilot episode's birthday dinner scene, the second episode's lunch discussion, and the previous episode's cab scene, they've been very much on the same page. Here, though, we get to see how the earlier Harvard Law Lorena Bobbitt comment finds its inevitable conclusion when Charlotte is not there to be the trad wife punching bag. But speaking of Charlotte, we see her arrive at Neville's farm in Connecticut, which is odd because Carrie told us it was in upstate New York earlier. But anyway, she tells him that she studied him in college, which is not surprising since she's working at a gallery. She kind of needs to have a degree in at least art history to be either an art dealer, like she was labeled in the pilot episode, or a gallery curator, which is what I'm pretty sure she actually is by this episode. Like maybe Darren Star doesn't know that we would at least be familiar with still living artists in order to work in the modern art space. And I say we because I got my degree to be an art critic. But Charlotte being this excited to see his current work is odd to me. In the Barn studio, Neville mentions that he used to paint full nudes, which even if they were abstracted like these are, would have been female nudes, which a decade before, when Charlotte would have likely been in college, would have been passé at best or offensive at worst. But Neville says before revealing the paintings, It's the closest I have ever come to pure universal God force. He adds, the source of all life and pleasure and beauty. Again, I'm not going to comment on the substance here, but I will say that these paintings and his explanation of them would have been considered redundant. Not only are the paintings very derivative of Georgia O'Keeffe's work, but the subject matter was addressed a lot and better by feminist artists in the 1970s who focused on a lot of central core imagery, including Judy Chicago, Hannah Wilke, Louise Fishman, and many others. But speaking of the paintings, the show's production designer, Jeremy Conway, said, the vagina paintings embarrassed a lot of people. 2 artists painted them for us, and one day I called an art director who works with me often, Kim Jennings, and said, I've got these paintings we are doing for an upcoming show. They're large format and in 4 styles, and I need you to come over and tell me if they are working in terms of color theory. When she walked into the studio and saw them, she got beet red, turned around, and left. And this is a Bennington girl. By the way, Bennington College is a private liberal arts college in Vermont with an alumni list that includes Donna Tartt, Bret Easton Ellis, and Justin Theroux, who we'll meet very soon. So again, I'm surprised at Charlotte's shock here, but in comes Gertrude, Neville's wife, who's played by Phyllis Somerville, known for her roles as May McGurvey in Little Children and as Grandma Fuller in Benjamin Button. She died more recently than Keating in July 2020. Gertrude brings them lemonade and cookies and makes this all look just very domestic. Again, no opinion, but Gertrude's presence seems necessary so that Neville isn't a total creep. But is he not a total creep? I think Gertrude's presence actually makes Neville a fake feminist man. And I'm not going to get into this. Instead, go watch Brienne Claire's recent expose of this not at all recent phenomenon. But I am so uncomfortable for Charlotte here because she's in there all alone. Neville is technically in a position of power here. He holds all the cards because he's the one who decides if he'll show in her gallery or not. So yeah, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Another thing I'll bring up briefly is this myth of the reclusive artist. For some reason, we were convinced in the 90s that a bunch of artists were living out in the middle of nowhere, like a whole generation of Ted Kaczynskis, but they're ridiculously rich and successful and dropping art bombs instead of actual bombs. Granted, Neville could be loosely based on abstract expressionist Jackson Pollock before his death. Pollock was considered a bit of a recluse and painted in a shed, but honestly, it's kind of up to debate as to whether Pollock was actually a recluse or if this was later exaggerated to further the manliness of not just Pollock, but other abstract expressionist male artists. Anyway, Charlotte apparently agrees to pose for him, so gross. Carrie and Samantha are back at Balzac, and we know that because this is the exact shot that we open with. They try to get seated again with no success. Samantha asks for a male host, continuing her point of view of the power of the female sex. Real quick though, what is up with this fucking hat? I feel like the 90s was rife with this kind of strange host styling moment. Like the hat that she wears reminds me of something Berger says in a season 6 episode, nice hat. Like we had the opening mini top hat, the feathered monstrosity earlier, and now this one, which isn't as bad as the others, but I still hate it when it's combined with those damn gold lame tops. Anyway, Samantha and Carrie look great in this fur-lined sweater and snakeskin bodycon spaghetti strap dress respectively. Since they can't get in, Carrie says she's going to the bathroom and then they're leaving. As she walks up the stairs, we first hear Amalita and then she screams for Carrie. As Carrie walks up, we see that Amalita is wearing this incredible dress. It looks like it could be another Ungaro, but this could be what she picked up at Dolce and Gabbana. It could also be a Dior or a Versace dress. We meet Mario, played by Jordi Caballero, a Spanish dancer, choreographer, and actor who's been in a few roles, but mostly a lot of music videos, including recently playing Camila Cabello's dad in Don't Go Yet. We also meet Alain, Justine, and Peter. So again, In a fun casting twist, we have a Spaniard playing an Italian. One odd thing though, Amalita says they're going to Venice next week for the film festival, but the Venice Film Festival is in August, not in May. Anyway, Carrie is almost abducted by Mario and luckily gets away just in time. One clever, albeit cliche, camera trick is showing the group not as glamorous any longer, but kind of cartoonish by using a fisheye lens to show us Carrie's growing distaste for Amalita's lifestyle. Mario acts like a man because he's obviously never heard the word no, but at least he couldn't turn it into a yes. Again, gross. But fuck Mario, and let's talk about Amalita more in depth. So, as we know, Amalita did show up in the book. We know that she's not Italian. She was brought up very proper on Fifth Avenue. We also know that she's an international crazy girl rather than a party girl. However, there are deeper differences between book Amalita and show Amalita. So in the book, we also meet Ray, of whom Amalita says, if a woman wants to sleep with a man, makes the choice, that's her business. But she's not a good person. I heard that she wanted to be one of Madame Alex's girls, but even Alex thought she was too crazy. Carrie asks, so how does she survive? Amalita says she takes gifts. A Bulgari watch, a Harry Winston necklace, clothing, cars, a bungalow on someone's property, someone who wants to help her, and cash. She has a child. There are lots of rich men out there who take pity. These actors in their millions. They'll write a check for $50,000, sometimes just to go away. Oh, please, she said, looking at Carrie, don't be so shocked. You always were such an innocent sweet pea. But then you've always had a career. Even if you were starving, you've had a career. Women like Ray and I, we don't want to work. I've always just wanted to live. But that doesn't mean it's easy. How many times have I called you crying, no money, wondering what I was going to do, where I was going to go next? Men promise things and don't deliver. If I could have been a call girl, it would have been so much easier. But it's not the sex that's the problem. If I like a man, I'm going to do it anyway. But the fact that you'll never be on their level. You're an employee, but at least you might walk away with some cash. She raised her eyebrow and shrugged. My way, well, is there any future? And you've got to keep up with the clothes and the body, the exercise classes, the massages, facials, plastic surgery. It's expensive. But you remember when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was sick, flat broke, sharing a bedroom with a student for Christ's sake in a lousy flat because that was all I could afford, $150 a month. I had to go on welfare so I could get medical care to have the baby. I had to take the bus to the county hospital. And when I really needed help, Sweet Pea, there were no men around. I was alone, except for a few of my good girlfriends. So unlike the show, Amalita pops up a few times in the book for two reasons. First of all, everyone knows her in the book. And second, because at one point, Carrie has to bring her food after she's been lied to by another man and ends up flat broke again, squatting in a friend's apartment with her daughter. Luckily, in the epilogue, we learn that her daughter got into a prestigious preschool in New York and that she started her own consulting firm. But I do wish we got to see Amalita again in the show. I think they did her really dirty by making her so one-dimensional. Yeah, she is our stand-in for the Cafe Society woman who inspired Truman Capote to write Breakfast at Tiffany's, but we get the wrong conclusion from Amalita, much like we got from the film version of Breakfast at Tiffany's. We only got a glimpse of the hardship that Holly Golightly experienced in the Capote novella, but everything worked out at the end of the film. I've seen comments about Amalita being so fun and glamorous and complimentary, but that's because we only get a hint at the darkness behind her character. Amalita is living this amazing life, but it's not going to last. People think she's a hooker, and obviously her boyfriends do as well. That's why I don't love that we started off by saying Carrie is envious of her. I support sex work, but I think it's disingenuous to glamorize that work without acknowledging its realities. I do also have to say, there's no way that Carrie does not introduce Samantha to Amalita. Honestly, I doubt Samantha doesn't already know who Amalita is, and maybe that's why she snickers at Miranda's comment in the hotel room. But anyway, after looking at these 3 Balzac scenes, I'm pretty sure they filmed this one right after the previous one. I'm pretty sure that blonde guy is in both scenes, and they probably just added a layer to Carrie's silver eyeshadow to make it look slightly different. Anyway, we close on the opening of Neville's show at Charlotte's Gallery, which I assume is months later instead of what Carrie says is weeks. Not only does Miranda have the worst awkward stage hair grow out in the form of this page boy haircut, Charlotte's rocking a middle part again, but with much longer hair than in her Connecticut visit. Also, there's no way they didn't have this on the gallery schedule already, and that Neville finished another large-scale painting in a matter of weeks. Charlotte is wearing a Narcisco Rodriguez dress. Miranda is wearing an outfit eerily similar to the one she wore to Chaos in the pilot episode, but she styled this so much better with this fabulous necklace under the collar. We also see the first ever appearance of Carrie's iconic kimono. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anywhere if this is designer. I know Pat Fields talked about it at some point, so I'll look for that before we see the kimono again. But we find out that Charlotte is painting number 3. But one thing that cracks me up is that we do see the vinyl still up for the 25th anniversary show. As I mentioned last episode, they weren't expecting HD viewings of the show, so that was never meant to be seen, nor was the actual painting and number that represent Charlotte. So a few things before we part. First, Samantha broke her streak, going only 4 for 5 in the sex partners department. Also, let's do a quick check-in on our BIPOC character count. We're still at 2 because Carlo, the Argentinian, didn't say a single word. We once again saw some interesting experimentation going on with production, but at least we didn't have to endure the interviews this episode. But that is the full breakdown and discussion of the 5th episode of Sex and the City, The Power of Female Sex. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.